potential.
Mhm.
Across the university, sister organizations, maybe community colleges that feed into. Could we potentially have a student who is in a hard sciences course and they are moving up and they're beginning to need more difficult math, and maybe it's been a year or two since they've had that math. If the math program is also adapted, couldn't we provide an across the campus program? I guess my vision is that if a student begins to struggle or have forgotten some information from, say, trigonometry, and if the math program was adapted, could we not support that and remediate that loss of retention?
We do. It's called Unit Zero.
Unit Zero. Could you tell us more about that?
So Unit Zero is not, it's accessible but not assigned. Okay, it's part of a map, and it's that background, it's that information that is necessary. When they first go into their first unit and they do what's called a determined knowledge, which builds their map, if they score low on that determined knowledge, it will pull what is needed from the Unit Zero into the Unit One so they can get that remediation or what they need. And what we see a lot of times is no one needs all of Unit Zero. They need 2 or 3 nodes pulled in, and then they're quick with it, right? Because basically what you're doing is bringing things forward in their brain, right? You just want to remind them, like, you do know this. I thought you were going to go down a different path, which I want to kind of take us down. So if you look at any algebra textbook, the last 3 chapters are basically stats application, okay? So what we do, and we have several maps that go over several courses, right? So what we do is that algebraic application you need at the 300 level for stats, but you take algebra at the 100 level. So you can take this algebra and put it in the stats at the Unit Zero level. And so in case they need it, then they pull that in, right? And some of our math goes over like 4 different classes. Some of the writing goes over multiple classes. So yes, once you have the modules and the pieces of the map, they can be used across program in various ways. So
you bring up a thought. Writing seems to be the biggest part that we get challenged on with adaptive learning. Do you ladies see adaptive now or in the future being able to really assist the development of writing skills for learners?
Development of, yes, absolutely. Writing itself, no. And that's why in certain courses it doesn't work as fully adaptive, because you have to write. You have to write a paper. You have to write an assignment. And I think that's the big discussion that's going on right now. Is okay, well, you have all these adaptive skills. Do they translate into the ability then to synthesize those skills into an article or a paper? And we would submit, yes, and here's why. We actually look at, when we're developing a course, making sure, or we look at the percentages of adaptive assignments, and if writing is a core component of that course, then you could not pass the course by just completing it, the adaptive components of it. And we ensure that the integrity of the class is there, that because and I also talked about this in the article, 95% of time students will choose the adaptive assignment. It's more fun, they like the technology, they like to play in it, and not the writing. Not a shock at some level, except for those English majors. But we had to look at course design and say, well, we can't have a student pass a course if, in fact, the end result's a marketing plan.
So you lead me just very smoothly into the next question. So you have an administrator who's pulled in what he or she thinks are her champions. And of course, they come with lots of questions about this beyond just what is adaptive learning, but how does this work? And as they move through, they begin to realize students will spend a considerable amount of their time working in this program. And so they begin to say, how does this get impacted, or how does this get pulled into my grading scheme? Could you talk about how that's done here with CTU?
Sure. So to Connie's point, we make sure that where needed, the key components for the objectives are in the class, right? So there's that balance and weighting with the adaptive versus the non-adaptive, correct? So what we do with the adaptive grading is it's actually automated and picks up what the student is doing throughout the whole class automatically, and then it's transferred to our grade book. But the other thing that we did is we customized the grading feedback because students really, really hone in on that. And our grading feedback in adaptive is how to improve. It's personalized, so we've programmed it so it talks specifically to Connie, specifically to you. So it's a helpful. It's a way to improve yourself in adaptive. So many students, I was actually in a faculty training thing yesterday, and they were bringing up the revisions and how many students go back and actually revise and work longer in adaptive because they read about themselves, very personalized again, how they can improve. And so I would say while grading is important in post-secondary and higher ed, it's about the learning. It's about the evidencing of learning, and the grading almost becomes secondary, if you will, right? I mean, yes, they want to get to a certain point, but they're more involved, and the engagement comes because they're working on themselves. Right? They are working on themselves, and they're engaged in that, right? So it becomes about what else do I need to do for me, and the evidencing of knowledge, which becomes very important.
So that just, really hits on a lot of theoretical, frameworks. And I think that that's probably one thing that we have yet to do around adaptive learning is to really start thinking about how motivation is addressed in adaptive learning, scaffolding, all of these different aspects that we know make up for good instruction. And that's why my question would be, some of the reports that have come out recently have actually shown that adaptive learning has not had the kind of gains that others, and I know you all here at Colorado Technical University are having tremendous gains. So both of you ladies could address this from the administrative perspective, but then also from the design perspective. What advice might you give that single professor who feels like they're on an island attempting this on their own because they've heard or seen, or maybe they've had an administrator encourage them to do this, to see some improvement in an area? How do we help those professors, or what would you suggest that they do to ensure that the end product is actually going to employ all of these different techniques that we know improve learning?
Yeah, well, I'll take that one first. I think that, it's so interesting to hear you say that because we found quite the opposite. If we have, and we do have adaptive learning modules in our student orientation. And we have data that demonstrates that students who engage in adaptive learning persist into course with greater frequency than students that don't. Also, we measure students who engage in some of our adaptive learning challenge exams. So we allow students the opportunity to take a challenge exam if they have the knowledge, just as many do, using the end maps of courses and then track how students will do in the next course. And, track's probably not the best word, but that's what we did. We are watching the data to make sure, monitor. Thank you, Judy. Yeah. To make sure. I think that our success, I could boil it down into a couple of different points. One, we do have great technology, I have to say. We use Realize It, and we chose Realize It because we needed faculty content. And we did not want to use a third-party provider and get into a contractual relationship in that manner. Not that I'm against that, but in this instance, we wanted our faculty to own it. And that was key. And we kept it simple. And while we have a very sophisticated, really nice tool that has a lot of wonderful bells and whistles, what we encourage, and we had to sometimes very overtly encourage faculty to keep the courses you don't have to go and give a student 200 learning maps for a course. Even though we know that, we want them to have all of this information, you need to make sure the course objectives are met. And so some of it had to do with the design, because I think the natural inclination, and I'd ask you, Judy, to affirm this, is maybe putting too much, well beyond, like, for example, let me just say this before I kick it to Judy. You've got a course and you've got a textbook in it. Rarely do you cover every page of the textbook. But what we found is faculty wanted to put every page of the textbook in a map. And so once we figured out the secret sauce to the appropriate amount of content and how to design it, and so it really worked. But what I would say to anyone who's getting discouraged is keep at it, because there were times that we thought, this is a lot of work. This is a lot of work, but the results we saw were so positive, and our students love it, and our faculty love it, and we're seeing good success that, it ended up just being very positive for CTU.
So that's great, summary of all that. What I was gonna say is that I think that single professor you're speaking of should get in the conversation. As you know, nationwide, more and more people are talking about this. We attend a lot of conferences. There's a lot of networking. That's how we